Good afternoon again. It's my pleasure to introduce, this has been very productive so far. It's my pleasure to introduce my friend, Morteza Farajian. Morteza is the director of the Build America Bureau at the U.S. Department of Transportation. And thank you so much for agreeing to participate, Morteza. It's great to see you again.
Thank you very much, Norman. It's a pleasure to be with you and all of the participants. I've heard that you have a very good participation in this event.
We really do, and it just shows all the interest that there is in U.S. infrastructure. And one of the things that comes through loud and clear is the optimism all over our country, and also the idea that we have, it's a really interesting moment for infrastructure project development, not just because of the funds available, but also the transition to digitization and electrification. Can you give us a sense of your background and the role of the Build America Bureau?
Sure. I started working in infrastructure industry about 10 years ago as a full-time job. Prior to that, I was in university, so I come from academic background. I have a PhD that oftentimes folks tell me that why I got it, but it was a very good experience. But I was focused on public-private partnership projects when I was in the school. And it was a good opportunity to join the P3 office in Virginia about 10 years ago. I joined that office. They were one of the leading P3 offices in US, and they are still one of the leading offices. Over the 7 or 8 years that I was there, I worked on about $14 billion worth of P3 projects for Virginia, some of the largest projects that have ever been built in Virginia. Anything from express lanes to bridges and tunnels. Very, very exciting projects that I've worked on them. Quite honestly, it was a good experience, interesting experience to negotiate federal loans for those projects. These are low interest rate loans, very flexible. You can't find them in capital market because they're subsidized by US government. I probably negotiated about $4 or $5 billion worth of those loans for different projects in Virginia. And there was a point of time that folks from US DOT reached out to me and said, how do you feel about coming to this side of the table? You have always been sitting across the table from us negotiating these loans. Why didn't you come to this side? Because Virginia is one of the most active states in this industry, and other states are not taking advantage of some of the programs of the Bureau. So why don't you come here and try to bring that experience here to Washington, D.C. and try to make these programs more accessible and more diverse. And that's really how everything started. And just talking a little bit about those two programs, the main two programs we have, one of them is called TIFIA, which is a program that has been historically used in highway industry. A lot of highway projects in the US over the last 20 years or so have been financed through TIFIA. I don't have the exact numbers, but typically we have about $15 to $20 billion worth of loans on our portfolio, on our books, outstanding. And then the other loan program is RIF, which is mainly for rail projects. Very similar to TIFIA, both of them provide low interest rate loans. The rates are basically the treasury rates in US. They can go as long as 35 years after substantial completion, which you add, if you add the 5 years of design and construction, you could probably think about a 40-year loan, which is a long-term loan. Or they could be very short-term loans, even 5 years. There is no limit on how much borrowers can borrow from us on the high side. Of course, we do have a limit on a percentage of the project costs that the loan can cover. But we have loans that are multi-billion dollars, or we have loans, especially under REF, that are very small, a couple of $1 million. And then we have another program that's called private activity bonds. These are bonds that private companies issue when they are financing, especially P3 projects, transportation projects in the US. We can allocate tax-exempt status to those bonds. So the bonds are a little bit cheaper when they go to market and issue those bonds. Investors are willing to accept a little bit of a lower interest rate, which ultimately reduces the financing cost for the projects. We have $15 billion worth of authority that I'm actually glad and at the same time sad to report that we have used all of it. Glad that we have used all of it, sad that we don't have more, and we're going through this process to hopefully get additional authority under the program.
That's really fantastic. Tremendous program that you have. You've been in your position for over 2 years. How do you see things changing with the new Biden administration?
Thanks for that question, Norman. Transportation, I've always looked at transportation as a bipartisan issue. I have worked in different administrations, both at the state level and federal level, with both Democrats and Republicans. And my experience is pretty much everyone agrees that something needs to be done to U.S. transportation, especially U.S. infrastructure. We need to reinvest in our infrastructure in the U.S. because our infrastructure is aging. There is no dispute there. And that's really good because Bureau was created during Obama administration 5 years ago. We're actually getting very close to our 5-year anniversary in July of this year. And then during Trump administration, Bureau grew. We started, especially after I joined, we started diversifying our portfolio. We started a program specifically to reach out to rural communities. And that program has been very successful. Traditionally, both under TIFIA and REF, we are not oversubscribed. We actually have a lot of capacity. Currently, we have about $100 billion capacity under those two programs. But under that Rural Project Initiative, we got oversubscribed quickly, simply because the outreach that my team put together and the technical assistance that they provided to underserved communities, especially in rural areas, changed the way that they were thinking about funding their projects. Historically, they have been focusing on funding, having all the money in place. If you don't have money, try to phase it. But with some of these new products that we rolled out and the technical assistance we provided to educate people on them, as well as really the flexibilities we provided, we try to encourage them to think about finance. We all buy, most of us, not all of us maybe, we buy our houses through mortgage. We can think about the same concept when it comes to our infrastructure. And especially at local level, at rural level, that's a new concept for a lot of localities. So that was one of the big pushes we had under Trump administration, which was successful. And of course, now under President Biden, we have new policies, new initiatives, especially with Secretary Buttigieg. We are focusing on climate issues. We are focusing on environmental justice. We are focusing on new technologies, EV charging stations. So those are some of the new concepts that, especially with digitization, we are focusing on ITS projects. Those are some of the new areas that we are focusing on, and we are trying to diversify our portfolio in those areas.
That's really super interesting, especially the combination of transition and also consistency across administrations. You know, one of the things that strikes me is you worked on a number of key projects over the last, I said months here, but it's really years. Can you give us some highlights of the key projects that you worked on and also the key projects that you're looking at right now?
Sure. Over the last few months, we saw the fruits of a couple of long-running initiatives that we were working on them. You know that in infrastructure development, you need to be patient. Sometimes it takes years, sometimes months to go through the process to get a project ready for implementation. And that's true about our programs too. The outreach that we put in place about 2 years ago in Rural Project Initiative, we saw the fruit of that by closing 2 rural loans. These loans were given to transit agencies in 2 counties in California who were trying to build bus maintenance facilities, as well as creating some capacity for newer buses that are using electricity. And those 2 loans specifically, we were able to close them in a short period of time. The second one was closed in 5 months, which was a record for us, which is, you know, typically it takes about 12 months for us to close a loan. The other area that we saw very good movement with COVID, of course, everyone got hit pretty bad. Some of our borrowers got hit pretty bad. We started providing additional flexibility in terms of refinancing our loans. And we started looking at how we could refinance some of the existing loans. A lot of borrowers, existing borrowers went through the process, and 2 of them in particular, they closed early this year. Those were the first 2 loans closed under President Biden administration. And both of those loans lowered down the interest rate for the existing loans significantly. And one of them, I believe, MBTA reported that they saved about $150 million on a loan that was approximately $900 million. And all of those savings goes back to transportation reinvestment. So that was another good area that personally I was very happy to see that we could take advantage of the lower interest rates and help some of our borrowers. And it was also good for us because we were also able to lower the default risk in our portfolio. So that the lower debt service payments for the borrowers, the lower default rate in our portfolio, which is good also for taxpayers because our portfolio in general would be less risky. So those are the main two programs that I can talk about it. And as I said earlier, on the outreach side, we put a lot of emphasis on new concepts, new areas that we can expand to. Providing a loan to state infrastructure banks is one of those areas that we have explored over the past couple of months. It's something that we have the authorization to do it. We are in discussion now with a couple of state infrastructure banks, and hopefully we will see the first loan going to a state infrastructure bank sometime this year.
That's great. That to me, that makes a lot of sense. You know, one of the things, I was in Denver last week, and it's phenomenal when you go to Denver Union Station. And you see that, you know, RIF was absolutely fundamental in making that happen. And that's recreated all of downtown Denver. Can you just talk about some of your perspective in terms of how we can revitalize city centers, especially in terms of transit?
Sure. So our RIF program actually has a lot of flexibility. A lot of our RIF borrowers are serving downtown areas. And you mentioned Denver. Union Station in Denver is one good example. The other good example that I mentioned earlier is MBTA, for example, that they got a RIF loan from us to implement PTC technology to improve safety and meet federal requirements. Another good example that I can mention is the second loan that we closed this year. The loan was it's a refinancing actually for Dallas Area Rapid Transit Agency to expand their system out from International DFW Airport, as well as a lot of discussions that we have now with real estate developers who are trying to take advantage of our RIF TOD, Transit Oriented Development Authority, to actually finance vertical infrastructure around stations, train stations, specifically in downtown areas, or areas that people use to commute to downtown areas. So that's another area that we are working on it. Hopefully soon we will be able to provide additional clarity on the existing guidance that we have to help those developers understand better how they can take advantage of the RIF TOD loans. That's something that we have not explored in the past, simply because I think it's a little bit new both for us and for the borrowers, and it's an area that we have a lot of potential.
Yeah, you know, as you know, that's a favorite area of mine, and it's something that you see all over the world. So just talk a little bit more, if you don't mind. I love the idea of land value capture around transit stations, especially at a time where there's a huge opportunity, because for the longest time, RIF money, it was hard to figure out how to spend that money. And all of a sudden, you know, it's a really active program.
It is. There are a lot of possibilities and opportunities under that program. But the one thing that, Norm, I have experienced myself is that sometimes going through a process that we have at the different federal agencies in terms of the process, in terms of requirements, in terms of what you need to do to be eligible for different programs, and even understanding what these programs are is very complicated. As a result of that, a lot of developers, they either don't know where to start, they don't know how to do it, or they just simply give up because it's just too risky for them to go through this process. One of the things that we're doing is actually to work very closely with different modes. For example, with FTA, Federal Transit Agency, with FRA, Federal Rail Agency, to work very closely with them to streamline our process between grants and between loans, so that when someone wants to go through this process, as well as really environmental and permitting process, they can have a one-stop shop. They can have one person that they can go to and talk to, and then really get information about all of these programs at the same time and don't have to go through each one of them one by one. I think if we can make things a little bit simpler and streamlined, which, by the way, that's something that both parties support. It's one of those bipartisan things that I hear from both parties, that they want to streamline the process and make things simpler. I think that is going to help a lot to make these programs more active.
That's really great. And one other question I have is, there's, and I don't want to get you into trouble, but it's really interesting that there's a lot of talk about creating a national infrastructure bank. You mentioned support for state infrastructure banks, but other people talk about the TIFIA program is really, almost a national infrastructure bank, and it needs to be enlarged. How do you think about that? Does it make sense to I'm just thinking a little bit about this digitization, electrification of our infrastructure, the huge opportunities that you're talking about, that you're funding, supporting, spearheading. How do you think about additional funding institutions? I guess that's the focus of my question.
Norm, I can't really give you a straightforward answer. Being in my position at USDOT, anything I say, it might be taken out of context and then not just purely my personal view. But let me share with you some of my experience. I know that the TIFIA program has been a good experience. I know that as a user of TIFIA, and then later as someone who has worked on the other side of table, managing the TIFIA program with my team, I know that this program has helped a lot of projects, good projects, to be financed and move forward that otherwise they could have not been financed, or they could have been financed at a higher cost, causing other projects not to move forward. So that experience, we can maybe take that experience and think about whether that experience can be expanded now to other areas. TIFIA has certain limitations. The statute we have for TIFIA, the statute we have for GREF, only makes certain type of projects eligible. The world is changing in a way that now these projects, you can't look at them as individual projects anymore. These projects are interrelated. You need to have a comprehensive view. And I can give you one example. We are talking about, especially under the new administration, President Biden administration, there is a lot of push to focus on offshore wind farms. And of course, clean energy is a priority, and wind farms offshore, they can generate electricity. But when you think about them, you need all the equipments to be installed, and then you need to transmit the electricity that is being produced back to the cities that they're going to use it. You need to have a port that is going to basically be the intermodal channel that you're going to use to ship and send all these equipments to the sea to be installed, and then possibly to maintain things that may go wrong. So you need to have facility at port. You need to probably have highway facilities, because these turbines are going to be manufactured somewhere that they need to probably travel on highways and the height of bridges and the height of different superstructures that they need to go under. It needs to be modified. But we're talking about a huge, massive system, as well as you need technology, right? You need broadband. Because these are all being controlled virtually. So when you have a project like this with multiple elements, and some of those elements are under maritime administration, some of those elements we can rent to them under Build America Bureau, some of those elements are under Department of Energy, some of those elements may fall under different agencies, and each one of them may have different credit programs to lend to them. But again, going back to the comment I had earlier, that it becomes really, really complicated for a project sponsor to bring all of these different pieces of puzzle and put them together. If we can make this whole process simpler, easier, and maybe have that one-stop shop that we can go to and deal with all of these in one shot, I think personally that would make things a little bit easier, and of course the development is going to be much faster.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's fantastic. Let me ask you a question from the audience, and again, you're a government official, but I think this is a pretty straightforward technical question. And again, I really thank you for participating, Morteza. It's super kind of you. Are there infrastructure investment financing programs that view regional airports as nodal network hubs? Do you have thoughts on this? This is from Tim Murphy.
So with airports, that's actually an interesting question. If I understood the question properly, one of the areas that actually we have been thinking about is airports, because airports, unlike the other modes that they already have a credit program, they do not have a credit program right now. For rail, we have REF. For transit and highway, we have TIFIA. For maritime, we have other credit programs like Title 11 for ship financing. But for airports, right now, we don't have any credit program that I'm aware of. However, recently we expanded our services that we can provide under the public infrastructure authority that we have under TIFIA statute. There are certain airport terminals that have a transit access that under the authority that will be qualified to receive a TIFIA loan for certain improvements to their terminals. So that's a new area for us. Again, we're talking to multiple airports right now, and hopefully that can expand. But as I said earlier, that is just a very small scope of work. It cannot finance everything at airports.
That's great, though. I really appreciate it. I think that's all we have in terms of questions. And we've just about used up your time. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank you for all the work you're doing. On behalf of the 420 or so Canadian registrants, look forward to working with you and look forward to building a really competitive economy going forward. It's a pretty exciting time.
Thank you very much to have me, Norman. This is a very exciting time. I'm glad to see that people are using innovative technologies. They're thinking outside the box, P3s, innovative delivery models, as well as a topic that is dear to me because I've worked on it in my PhD dissertation, which is allowing people also to invest in infrastructure projects using crowd financing. So it's good to see that people are just using all the tools in the toolbox and try to get as innovative as possible to get these projects ready to put the shovel in the ground.
It's really exciting, and it's we've been working on it for a long time, and it's nice to see it coming to pass. A lot of optimism, so we really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Morteza, and we look forward to seeing you soon in person.
Thank you very much, Sam. Thank you.
Bye-bye.